Hi, and welcome to the Fierce Boys podcast. I'm your host, Brigette Gildemaster. This is a podcast for those who are ready to leave behind survival mode after abuse, where we talk about what it looks like to embody who you are as an individual, learn to love yourself, and bring to light healing after surviving abuse from relationships and religion. Pop your earbuds in to hear heartfelt and powerful intensity from myself and guests. Be ready to put into place actual tools and gather insight for you to use on your healing journey. And we've been chatting beforehand, so I am so excited for this podcast. You have so much to share and offer in the realm of toxicity and recognizing abuse and patterns and healthiness and when to leave even. And I am so excited to hear what you have to offer. We haven't had anyone speak so specific on that topic yet, and so I think this will be great. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you. My name is Dena Eve. I'm a writer and a motivational speaker. I love to kayak and hike. I do a little bit of rock climbing. I go dancing multiple times a week, and I love to cook. But what I'm most passionate about is I help people pursue emotional health by speaking about how to identify destructive relationship patterns and transform them into beneficial and meaningful connections.
I love it. So powerful, so needed. I know in my journey, that was something where I went, oh my gosh, that's the answer to all my confusion. And so having you speak out about that and having another voice in the world is exactly what women need. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background a little bit. What brought you to speaking out about toxicity?
Yeah, well, as you can probably imagine, no one with a perfect life circumstance wakes up one day and says, I'll talk about toxic things. So I was in an abusive marriage for 11 years. And I actually did not know it was abusive until I was already divorced. My marriage was primarily emotionally abusive, and I did not have the tools or the resources, the understanding to recognize emotional abuse. So I was actually divorced for a couple of years, probably, actually a few years, I think. And I was still struggling financially post-divorce. And a friend of mine recommended that I connect the reach out to the domestic violence group in our area and see if they could do anything to help me. And I was super confused because I did not think there was any domestic violence in my marriage. So I had no idea why I would reach out to them. But my friend kind of convinced me that some of the behaviors in my marriage, though I was not the target of the domestic violence, there was still a lot of violence present in my home, and that I qualified for a survivor of domestic violence, which was a huge mental hurdle to deal with. But then I did reach out to that group, and through that group, they kind of taught me about the cycle of abuse, and they helped open my eyes to what emotional abuse actually is, which was chilling initially. I'm a chronic researcher, and I unfortunately try to solve problems with research that cannot be solved with research. So when they first opened my eyes to the emotional abuse in my marriage, I thought, no, 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 not my marriage. And so I took to the internet and I researched. I went to website after website after website, researching terms, looking at stories, honestly desperate to find some confirmation that my marriage was not abusive. Unfortunately, it was. And so I did come to that realization. And then I had a lot more trauma to unpack and start working through. I found a counselor. I've been going to her every week for over 5 years now, still dealing with trauma. And I'm in a much, much healthier place now. I can say that, but it was a quite a journey for me to understand what was actually happening in my life. And it's a weird circumstance to be in, to feel like, but it's my life. I lived it. What do you mean I didn't know what was happening in my own life? But I didn't. So Because my life could have been very different had I had the tools to understand emotional abuse from the beginning, then what I really want to do is help give other people those tools to recognize, what does a healthy relationship look like? What does a toxic or even an abusive relationship look like? What is the difference? And then we can evaluate relationships that we're in, whether that's romantic or sexual, familial, even professional relationships. And because we're all in relationships and some of them are healthier than others. But if I can help others have those tools and either get out of a similar situation that I was in or just avoid that situation altogether, then I mean, that's really a big purpose that I lean into now.
Mm, yeah. So what led you up to that point? Like, how did you find your husband? What was your mindset in that way? Why, what upbringing did you have to not know what abuse was? Because I know I totally relate to that. So
Yeah. So I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. I would say that my childhood was really wonderful. I'm an only child. I felt very loved. I went to church every Sunday with my mom, and eventually, then multiple days a week, I was in youth group. I was on the worship team. I worked at our after-school daycare program. I worked at our summer camp. I mean, I was church. I was the church girl, if ever there were a church girl. And then for college, I actually went to a Bible college. I went to a 4-year school, got a degree in religion, and I met my husband there. I actually met him the day before classes started. I was carrying a box across campus that I had shipped of some of my things because my school was pretty far away. And he helped me carry the box across campus. And I was just kind of taken from that moment that, what chivalry he displayed, what a gentleman, what a godly man, I thought. And we started dating fairly quickly, and we got engaged at the end of my freshman year. We got married the next summer, and then we left the country to be missionaries. And we served as missionaries for several years. I loved it, loved my experiences. And then we came back to North America, and he pastored. I was the pastor's wife, raising little pastor's kids. And so there wasn't anything in my church upbringing that really talked about emotional abuse. There wasn't anything in my family, my very Christian, conservative Christian family, that talked about emotional abuse. And also now I look back and, in my opinion, in a lot of the church circles I was in, the teachings of biblical submission, of godly womanhood, what it means to be an excellent wife, Proverbs 31, all those teachings that I grew up with. Now I look back and I think that some of those teachings were actually codependence, that the church was actually preaching codependence as a positive value, but labeling it differently. So, not that all churches do that, but I think in a lot of the circles I was in, that was preached. I think there's a lot of codependent adults in my personal family as well. And so I was raised by codependent people, to be a good little codependent. And so I was. But I thought that these things I was doing, these attitudes I had, were godly and that they were good and they were something to aspire to. And so there were often times that when I look back, at the time I thought, oh, what a great wife I'm being, look how I'm submitting, look how I'm sacrificing. Not that I was perfect, nobody's perfect, but a lot of these behaviors I thought were really good and positive. And now I look back and I think, no, I was just being taught how to be codependent, which isn't healthy for me. It wasn't healthy for my marriage. I don't think that was healthy for my husband. It certainly was not a healthy example for my children. And that's one of the main things I've been working on for so many years in therapy is how to not be codependent anymore and how to, live healthier in that way.
yeah. Yeah, I love everything you said. I think there's so much I can relate to because I grew up in so many of the same circles of what it was taught to be a woman, and having really it's your rights stripped from you in so many ways too, because you're people pleasing everyone else and you completely lose your own identity in making sure everybody else is happy. And yeah, specifically your husband, all that weight falls on your shoulders to make sure you're doing everything so that he's happy and life keeps trucking along. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I could definitely relate to that. So tell us, what are some of the tools you have started to implement in learning, when to recognize when something is toxic?
Absolutely. So I think there's several tenets of healthy relationships. And again, I think they can apply to any kind of relationship we're in. But some of the tenets, and obviously this is a whole field that can be studied a lot more. And I am not a psychologist or a clinician in any way. But some of the tenets of healthy relationships are things like mutual respect, open communication, honesty, certain things like that. And again, I think one of the key terms is mutual, because you can definitely be in a relationship where one party is honest and communicates openly and is respectful, and another party or parties are not. So some of those things I think are really key in learning, what is a healthy relationship. And one thing that I think is also very important are healthy boundaries. I've done a lot of reading and researching and listening to other podcasts about what healthy boundaries are in a relationship. As someone who grew up codependent, boundaries were demonized. Boundaries were called secrecy. Boundaries were a negative thing, because the people in my life that either taught me to be codependent or relied on me to be codependent, relied on me not having boundaries. And so for me, learning that healthy boundaries are healthy. Just like having a fence in your backyard is a boundary on your property. There's nothing wrong about having a fenced-in backyard. There's nothing evil or demonic about it. You can lean over the fence and chat with your neighbor. It doesn't mean you're shutting everybody out. It doesn't mean you're private or secret or anything, that you're doing anything nefarious behind your fence. It simply means it's absolutely acceptable to say, this is my space and I am responsible for this space. My kids or my dog can play within the space. I can garden within my space. And this is a healthy place to be. I can absolutely leave my fenced in backyard too, but I always know that this is my space to take care of. It also means that my neighbor's fenced in space is not my responsibility. I don't get to go over into their backyard and tell them how to plant their garden, or wander into the backyard and feed their dog. That is not my space. I am not responsible for it and I don't belong there. So learning how to create healthy boundaries in my own relationship and what that really looks like, and all the different subjects, or parts of my life that can have a healthy boundary, has been crucial, has been so important for me. And the first step for me was getting over that mental hurdle of viewing boundaries as bad and changing that to view boundaries as a good thing, as a healthy thing in my life. And then starting to look at, what areas of my life might need a boundary and what would those boundaries be? How do I potentially enforce a boundary? What do I do if a boundary is crossed? And also, of course, how to identify boundaries in other people, how to respect their boundaries, what to do if I accidentally cross someone else's boundary. So there's been a lot of learning that has helped me to identify, if I know this relationship was toxic and I don't want to be in it, so what's the alternative? How do I do it differently now? And that's been instrumental. I have seen a night and day difference for myself, with a little gray area in the middle as I learned. And I'm always still learning, of course, but a night and day difference in how I've been able to approach relationships and maintain relationships, versus what I was used to before.
Yeah. I love too always how we grew up in that. Yeah, it's the certainties of the way you grew up, but yet it's so harmful. And yet boundaries are so clear. and learn, once you learn all of this, it's so clear what is, for you and what's not for you. Yeah, like you said, there's those gray areas and you're learning and stumbling. But then once you get into it and you know it and you can see it and recognize it, it's makes life so much easier for everyone. Like I love your analogy of a fence, because that's all that it is. And you can see a fence and you can see it's there, and there are proper rules to that. So I love that. That is
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you.
Yeah. So if you don't mind my asking, so then when you left and you reached out to the domestic violence shelter and started learning about this, what was the key thing that clicked for you and you're finally like, oh yeah, I have to admit that, this was an abusive relationship? What was you struggling with, and what toxic trait finally clicked with you? I guess I'm trying to say that was really wordy, but
No, you're good. You're good. Honestly, I think for me, the biggest thing that helped me realize my relationship had been abusive was learning what the cycle of abuse is. That's like a standard term used in psychology or counseling. And I was having a hard time before hearing about the cycle of abuse. I was having a hard time understanding that my relationship had been abusive because there were so many great times I could look back on. There were times that he wowed me and knocked my socks off, and he was so romantic. And he even praised me in front of other people and said how great I was. And, or he bought me gifts, or he took me places. And, and I thought, well, he can't be abusive if he did all those things. So I was very confused and definitely want to deny that it could have been abusive. But when I looked at the cycle of abuse, that does pivot between building you up and doing wonderful things and then knocking you down. When someone went through that cycle of abuse with me, I could very clearly see a pattern that had been present in my marriage. And it was like being smacked in the face. It was also difficult because, so that part was good. It opened my eyes. I got smacked in the face. I thought, oh no, this is abusive, or, it was abusive. Which, naming it, understanding it is the first step in being able to heal from it and to think about, what do I do now? How do I move forward? What needs action, or what needs attention now? But it was also hard because even though my marriage had ended, even though it was over and I knew that it was for the better, I still had all these wonderful memories. I could say, he wasn't bad. We just didn't work out, Now I had all these really beautiful memories that were starting to be packaged a little differently in my brain, because now I saw them as part of the abuse, part of the cycle of abuse. And that was also really hard because I wanted to be able to hold on to the beautiful memories. I wanted to be able to say, wow, that time he took me to that B&B for our anniversary and he surprised me. Like that was so beautiful. Yeah, it didn't work out, but look at the great things that happened in the meantime. Now I realized that was part of the cycle of abuse. So what do I do with those memories? Do I have to paint them in a negative light now? Do I have to label them as part of the abuse? Do I have to wash them away, the baby with the bathwater? What do I do about it? And that answer is different for every person, as they deal with whatever trauma or, toxicity they have gone through. For me, I've chosen to still package those away. And on an intellectual level, I can recognize, yep, those were part of the cycle of abuse. On a sentimental, on a personal level, I have chosen to say, but you know what? I was happy at the time. I was happy because I was unaware, but I was happy. I loved those feelings. I loved those things we did. There were many times that I was happy in those moments, and I'm okay to leave it that way. I don't have to say, but it was abuse. I certainly could if I needed to process it that way. But for me, I've chosen to say, that's okay. Those memories were happy and I'm fine with it, But yeah, it was really understanding the cycle of abuse that initially opened my eyes for me and went, oh crap, you just perfectly described my marriage. And I don't think I can deny anymore that it was abusive. And then I sought a counselor and said, I was in a decade plus long abusive marriage, and I'm just now realizing it, even though I'm already divorced, and I need help working through this.
Oh, so yeah, so hard to hear coming from someone else too, because I can relate so much with very specific instances of like, and the confusion, like I didn't know a lot of the terminology until I was out as well. And so, that confusion of just like, no, he couldn't have meant that because he said he loved this or blah, blah, blah. And so, but then that constant hamster wheel, I call them circles, going in circles. I hated them. Hated the circles because yeah, it just felt like you go around and around, and every time you try to get to the point of something, it would go over here. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's maddening. And for several years in my marriage, I knew I was unhappy. There were, often he would end up going to bed before I did. He didn't typically help out with household stuff, so often there was still a kitchen to clean or laundry to put away or whatever. And he would go to bed and I would stay up. And there were so many nights that I would be folding laundry or doing dishes and just bawling silently because I was codependent and I didn't want to burden anybody else with my feelings, but I was bawling, doing these household chores and just thinking, I am so unhappy. I am miserable. Is this what marriage is? I never wanted this. I never wanted this. But why am I so unhappy? And anytime any of that would be expressed, not in those terms, of course, but anytime that my now ex-husband could see that I was unhappy or struggling with something, the answer he gave was always that it was me. I was ungrateful, or I was manipulative, or I, just wasn't, whatever the issue was, it was me. I needed to be better. I needed to be more godly. I needed to pray harder. Or I needed to submit better, or I needed to, whatever the thing was, it was me. It was something within me that wasn't quite right, and I needed to fix it. And of course, I believed that. And it also worked with the paradigm I understood as well about, how spirituality and Christianity works, about, if I were just a better Christian or, whatever, then I would be happier. I needed to just find my joy in the Lord, or, learn to be content with my circumstances. And so I really just thought the problem was me all along. And then later, when I learned that I had been in an abusive relationship for over a decade, I thought, oh, that's why I wasn't happy. How can you be happy? It wasn't, oh, sorry, something spelled.
it's okay. It's happened to me before. There's a picture missing right here too. So I get it.
We're not even in an earthquake zone. But after I realized that I had been in an abusive marriage, I thought, oh, that's why I wasn't happy. You're not supposed to be happy when you're enduring abuse. It wasn't me. Again, I have definitely learned things that I do better in relationships now, ways that I have grown, that I have improved, things that I could have done better then. But I feel like the bottom line is, when you're being abused, the buck stops there. How would I have been happy in that?
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit more. Like, what advice would you give to a woman who is, either out and like healing the way you were, or maybe even still in it and, trying to figure this out? She's started to hear things, about what might be going on. What advice would you give her to figure out if it's actually a pattern and a problem and time to leave, or something to work on her or together? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, again, not being a counselor, it's a little hard to give advice about should you leave or not, but, and obviously the circumstances are different for every person. All humans, we're all faulty creatures just trying to figure things out, right? We all make mistakes, intentionally or not, in relationships. So I don't think there's ever going to be a time that any human on earth has a relationship with another person and there's never ever been an issue in it ever. Nothing ever went wrong. So not every time that there's a problem in a relationship does it mean it's toxic and you have to end it, you know? To some degree, I think if we're really honest with ourselves, we know. We know if it's a pattern. We know, are you unhappy more than you're happy? I think if you look at like the tenets of a healthy relationship, I think you can use some of those things to kind of evaluate, like, are these present the majority of the time in my relationship? You know, for instance, mutual honesty is important in a relationship. Does that mean every single time somebody lies, it's abusive and you have to end it? No, of course not. But do we generally have a pattern of being honest with each other? Maybe we made a mistake every now and again, you know, or I told a little white lie or covered for something. That can often be recovered, you know. Are we generally more honest than we are dishonest? Do we generally have good and open communication? Okay, maybe sometimes we shut down, or maybe sometimes we fought in kind of a dirty way that wasn't okay. But do we generally have good open communication, or do I really feel like the lines of communication are damaged here, like on a kind of consistent basis? So I think you can walk through some tenets like that. You know, when I establish a boundary in this relationship, is it typically respected? Or do I feel like the other person blows past my boundaries on a regular basis? You know, sometimes with boundaries, the other person will even tell you with their words, that's stupid, I'm not respecting that, you know? And they'll make it real obvious to you that they're not going to respect that boundary, because they'll even tell you, I don't agree with that, or that's stupid, or why would you do that, or that, you know, whatever. I will also say, I don't think anybody, even if it's not abusive, even if it's not toxic, if you don't want to be in a relationship, you don't have to be in that relationship. You don't have to have some clinically based reason why you have to leave. You don't need approval from the other person. You don't need your family to get on board with it. You don't need your counselor to understand or your church to understand it. If you don't want to be in that relationship for whatever reason, you don't have to be in it. Period. Full stop. End of story, you know? But if you're not just initially wanting to leave and you're trying to figure out, is this good or not? I think there's a lot of resources online. There's a lot of websites that talk about emotional abuse, that talk about tenets of, you know, things like the other person trying to establish power and control over you, or manipulating you, gaslighting you. You know, do they cut you off financially? Do they alienate you from loved ones? Do they tell you that you're not as good as they are for whatever reason? You know, you're not as pretty, or you're not as smart, or you don't contribute as much, or maybe you're not as good as you used to be. You know, exactly. There's a lot of specific markers of emotional abuse. And not every abusive relationship is going to have all of those. There are certainly some textbook markers that were not present in my relationship. And those can be kind of sticking points for some people. You know, it can be easy to go, oh, well, they didn't do this thing to me, so it's not emotional abuse. Just like a medical diagnosis, you don't have to have every single marker in order for that diagnosis to be true. Most people don't have every single marker in a physical health diagnosis or in a mental health diagnosis. So there's a lot of resources online. There are some books, there's a ton of websites. Definitely, I would say reach out to a counselor if you have one in your circle. I will say this, I did not know beforehand that a lot of counselors will work on sliding scales. Because mental health can be very difficult to afford in our country right now. A lot of insurance plans will cover a mental health visit. Some insurance plans do not. Not everyone has insurance either. A lot of communities will have a community health, doctor network or hospital or something. A lot of those have mental health resources that you can reach out to. A lot of counselors will work on sliding scales. Some counselors will even do pro bono. I would definitely say try to connect with a women's shelter, a domestic violence group, something of that nature in your area if you have one. If not, we have phones and internet. You can often reach out to one in a different location. See if there are resources like that that can help you sort through. You don't have to be positive that it was emotional abuse in order to start talking with a counselor. It's totally valid to say, I'm having some issues in this relationship. I'm not sure if it's abusive. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know if I should stay and fix something or if I need to leave, but a counselor is perfectly suited to help you work through that. Talk with a friend, reach out to a friend. If you have any kind of a network of someone who will talk with you about these things. Yeah, and so those are places I would start if I was really if I were questioning what's going on in this relationship, should I still be in it? I would try to reach out to some people and see if you can leverage, a network or online resources. Another thing I would say is it's not fail proof, but I think our instincts are a big deal. We are the only animal that consistently ignores our own instincts and goes against them. Every other animal has instincts for a reason and they follow them. But we are so highly evolved that we have all these analytical skills and we try to justify and reason our way past our instincts. And I am incredibly guilty of that. So I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody, but I am learning to trust my instincts more when I have that gut feeling of something's not right here. In the wild, if an animal steps into a situation and they just have that gut of something's not right here, they run. They immediately run. And all too often as humans, we say, yeah, but I have all this scientific understanding. I can, talk my way out of it. But I think when we have those instincts of something's really not right here, I think we need to pause for a minute and pay attention to it and think, okay, I probably have that gut feeling for a reason. I probably need to do something about this.
Oh, I love what you said. Oh my gosh, there's so many ways, so many things you said. There were a million golden nuggets in there. You just blew it out of the water. Oh my gosh, that was so
Thank
good.
you.
And you were in it too. I could tell. I was like, there she goes. I love it. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'll just go backwards. The instincts. Oh my gosh. Yes. Listening to your own intuition is absolutely, number one in my opinion. Cause yeah, like what you said, it just, we can make up every excuse possible. And I think a huge part of it is it's the evil we know versus the unknown. And so, and we're taught to, like you said, with codependency and everything, you just keep to yourself, you keep going, you don't want to bother, you don't want to. And as women, we're labeled as whiners and complainers and all those things. And so to just say something to a friend, if it's not real, sometimes just saying something kills it. And you're like, oh, I just need to get that off my chest. It's actually not as bad as I thought. And so, yeah, you just said so many good things and being able to recognize the pattern and, following that. And I love also too, I have to point out what you said about if you don't want it, you don't have to stay in it. It don't matter if it's good or bad or amazing. If it's not right and in alignment with you and there's just something incomplete, you don't have to stay. I love that. I absolutely love that so much because I wish I had heard that way more in my dating than I did. So yeah.
There are so many things I wish I had heard 20 years ago. But that's why I'm trying to talk about it now, and help other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Yeah, absolutely. So what, I feel like I had another question in there, but what, oh yeah, I did want to bring up, when we had talked before, we jumped on the podcast. So you had talked about you've been doing some writing, and that's kind of how you got started too. And I loved what you said before we got on about how it's actually been more traumatizing to you than healing, because I talk a lot about how it was healing for me specifically, and journaling and all of that. And so I'd love for you to share your experience with that on your healing journey, and how that has been more traumatizing to relive, if you don't mind, just for people who are listening who don't resonate with me over here, like, journal, do it, do it, do it. And on that flip side of like, yeah, you don't have to relive those things if it's harmful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, first of all, I just always love that there are so many different ways to approach the same problem, because we're all different people. So nothing is ever a one size fits all, right? So I've been a writer for many years. My day job for a long time has been in marketing, and I've specialized in writing. So writing is what I do. That said, journaling for me has never been the way that I process things, which is kind of funny, but I'm more of a talker. I'm more the person who will call up my friend, or even seeming weird, just talk it out all by myself out loud in my bedroom or my living room. I'm more of a talker when it comes to processing. Journaling for me does nothing, because for me, by the time I go to write it down, I've already processed it in some other way. So yeah, that's not the thing for me. So I have been working on my book for, gosh, about 5 years now, almost finished, and I'm very excited. But for me in writing this, because I have been writing, in great visual detail, a lot of the circumstances I went through that were abusive, I do kind of relive that when I'm writing it. My head starts to pound, my throat feels tight, I can feel my blood pressure raise. It is not a positive experience for me to write. So, which also means I can't do it in short little spurts, because I have to really like kind of immerse in it, and be okay to sit in that kind of darkness and anxiety for a while I write. I have a whole process of things that kind of help me mitigate a little bit of that anxiety, but it's going to be there every time I write. But I do it because I just so wholeheartedly in my core believe that these tools are so needed for, unfortunately, way too many people out there. And if I had had a book like the one I'm writing, things might have been really different for me. So for me, when I need, a cathartic process, or when I need therapy, I go to therapy, or sometimes I call a friend and talk through it. I'm a crier. That helps for me too. I, kind of physically get it out. But yeah, for me, journaling is not part of the healing process. And I've had to make my peace with it. I had some classes in college that were really big on, like, we would have journaling assignments, and we would have to turn in a journal at the end of the semester. And I hated it, because it felt like, this is nothing for me. I've already worked through the process. This is for you so that I can get an A on this. But yeah, it doesn't do it for me. And I've come to a place where I'm okay with it. Journaling is not for me, and I might be in the minority, but I'm okay with it. That's all right.
No, I love that. I think that's great to recognize it, and learning to be okay more with things. I feel like, I don't know if we drag it out from the 90s and New Year's resolutions, I feel like, but like we feel like all these things are good for us. You have to do this, you have to do that to heal, and you don't have to do everything, and you have to find what works for you. And so I really appreciate you sharing that component, because it is completely the flip side of what has worked for me. And so I never want anyone to feel like what's worked for me in my audience is what you need to be doing. I want everyone to find what works for them. And so I love that you mentioned crying. Like, yes, absolutely. Huge emotional release, like in the body, working all that energy. So yeah, there's so many other things out there. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to respect your time too and everything. So, why don't you tell us where people can find you and follow you? If you have a published date for your book yet, I don't think you said anything about that, but I know it's coming. Anything exciting coming up, and if you offer anything on your website, things like that, all the goodies.
Yeah, no, I wish I had a publishing date. I don't yet. And I don't even have a publisher approved title. to share. So it'll just be under Dena Eve. But I am working on finishing the book. You can find me on Instagram on Dena.eve. So it's DENA.EVE. My website is denaeve.com. If you want to reach out about booking speaking engagements, you can do so there. And I do have a LinkedIn that you can find me there as well under Dena Eve.
Awesome. Fabulous. Yeah. And I always will drop all of that in the show notes, where you can just click and make it that easy. So, thank you so much for all your time. I feel like we could have a whole nother podcast in the future on some very specific things you talked about, but this was an
Anytime.
amazing overview. So yeah, awesome.
I've had a blast too. And I just hope that, I mean, what you're doing is incredible. And I love that you've put this out there to help so many people. And I hope that I can help with that as well. So thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. Thank you for being another voice in the world. I don't think there can be enough of us at this point. So
True.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Fierce Voice podcast. I truly hope you found healing insight, tools, and a space held for you in this journey. We are all in this together, and you are not alone. You can find me, your host, Brigette Gildemaster, on all social media platforms, and check out my website at www.brigittegildemaster.com, where you can listen to past Fierce Voice episodes, check out my media features, find my books, and inquire about booking me for your next virtual or in-person event. My keynotes are impactful with real-life stories, actionable tools, and inspiration for healing after a life-altering experience. Or check out my workshop event to learn more about how you can prevent abuse in your area. Have a wonderful day, and we'll catch you next time on the Fierce Voice Podcast.